Hello, my name is Brett Kirkpatrick, and I'm a staff psychologist at Towson University's Counseling Center. This is the second video in a series of 3 that are designed to discuss the current and historical issues pertaining to race within the U.S. Again, these videos are designed to speak mostly to white students, but people of color are welcome to listen and share their thoughts and experiences in the comments section below. I share this video with trigger warnings as there may be some sensitive material. In my last video, I discussed how my personal views of racism have changed throughout my life. In today's video, I will discuss another form of racism that is extremely prevalent and relevant to what is going on in the world today. That form of racism is called colorblind racism. As I did in the first video, I want to not only discuss the definition of colorblind racism, but also provide examples from my own life of how I've practiced colorblind racism, regrettably so. Essentially, colorblind racism is the denial and or minimization of race and racism in the U.S. An example of colorblind racism is when a white person states, "I don't see race" or "I don't see color." Hence, they are blind to color or colorblind. These statements essentially deny the role that race and racism currently play in all of our everyday lives and have played historically. It is essentially the idea that race and racism are not important in contemporary society and may not even exist. Here's an example of colorblind racism from my personal life. In 1997, I was a senior in high school in Brooklyn, New York. My high school required a senior project which needed to be about Brooklyn. 1997 was also the 50th anniversary of Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier in professional sports, so I chose that as my topic since he played for the Brooklyn Dodgers. My project didn't focus on Mr. Robinson and his experiences, though. It focused on Brooklyn, which was my choice. What I stated in my project was that in 1947, race wasn't a factor in Brooklyn, New York. I described Brooklyn as this utopian bubble insulated from the rest of the world, where the Brooklynites only judged Jackie Robinson on his merit as a baseball player and ability to help the team win. I triumphantly concluded that race wasn't a factor in Brooklyn at this time, and that's what allowed Mr. Robinson to break the color barrier there. My entire project was colorblind, and here are 2 primary examples of how. 1, the U.S. was still legally segregated at this time, so race was definitely a factor. 2, at the time I was completing this project, I had personally witnessed racism in Brooklyn. One incident involved a day in the summer when I was with 2 black friends of mine and we were coming back from the beach in Brooklyn. The subway line we were on discontinued its service due to required maintenance, which is sometimes typical. We had to leave the train at a stop we didn't know in a neighborhood called Bensonhurst. I knew of Bensonhurst because a few years prior, a young black man named Yusef Hawkins was killed there by a group of white teenagers. I remember this incident with my friends distinctly because I remember being scared, thinking if people there wanted to harm the friends I was with, would they also decide to harm me too? Selfish, right? This incident shows that I knew racism was happening in Brooklyn in 1997 because I was worried how it might inadvertently harm me too. It doesn't make sense that I was aware of racism and afraid of it, but at the same time also writing that Brooklyn was above racism. Well, that is colorblind racism in a nutshell. Also, if you're thinking, wow, Brett, 1997 was a long time ago, I may not even have been born then, you would be right. It is a long time ago. Although the story itself is old, the example of colorblind racism is still current, as this is the type of colorblind thought process that still occurs fairly often in our society today. Denying the existence of race and racism appears to have a distinct purpose. We live in a society today where tremendous inequalities based on race occur in every institution, including familial net worth, education, life expectancy, health outcomes, and involvement in the criminal justice system, to name just a few. Many have asked, how can we live in a society that claims to be above the trappings of race, racial stereotypes, and racism when such distinct and tremendous disparities exist? Denying the existence of race and racism subverts and distracts from the existence of these race-based disparities, which allows them to be maintained. Colorblind racism marks an evolution in racism. Prior to the civil rights movement of the 1960s, more overt forms of racism, such as the use of racial slurs like the N-word, were more socially acceptable. The race-based inequalities in society, primarily generated by slavery and then segregation, were justified by the commonly held belief that black individuals and people of color were biologically inferior to white people. However, after the civil rights movement of the 1960s, the use of racial slurs, endorsing beliefs about biological differences, and openly appearing racist became less socially acceptable. Colorblind racism emerged as a style of racism that was more socially acceptable and still worked to maintain race-based inequalities. Instead of stating that the race-based inequalities existed due to biological differences, colorblind racism now stated that they were due to cultural differences, characterized by statements such as, people of color are lazy, and if people of color worked harder, they could achieve more. The language is still derogatory, but it suggests that race and racism are not factors at all. In general, colorblind racism wants to paint a picture of a world where race and racism do not exist. Statements such as, I have a black friend, or slavery ended 160 years ago, or my grandparents came here with nothing and worked hard and achieved, are all designed to deny that racism is active in the present day. I would be lying if I told you I had never said or thought these things. However, learning more about how current and previous laws and racist practice have contributed to the ongoing racial inequalities found in our society helped change my beliefs. If you are unsure of the validity of what I'm saying, here's one piece of evidence, although many other pieces of evidence exist. In a 2004 research study, 5,000 resumes were sent out to open job listings. The resumes were exactly the same except for the names on them. Half of the resumes used uniquely white names and half used uniquely black names based on census data. Overwhelmingly, resumes with uniquely white names were called for interviews over those with uniquely black names. They performed the study again and this time made the resumes with uniquely black names have stronger qualifications. However, the results came back the same. Similar studies produced the same results when examining racism in the housing market. The person who is reading the resumes might tell you that they are not racist, and they might even say that they have black friends and or coworkers. But within colorblind racism, the intentionality of the person is not important because the practice and outcome is still racist. When we look at what is happening in the world today, I believe the Black Lives Matter movement is trying to call attention to the fact that race and racism are at play in a world that is trying to say they are not. I believe the words Black Lives Matter are intended to counter the rhetoric of colorblind racism, as well as the racism that preceded it, which has acted as if black lives do not matter. To me, the words Black Lives Matter do not convey that white lives or any other lives don't matter. As white people, we cannot continue to make the mistakes that I did in 1997 and am probably still making. We cannot assume that race and racism are not important factors in a world where tremendous race-based inequalities exist. Rather, we need to work to uncover our own biases and adherence to racist practice in order to alleviate the harm that has befallen communities of color recently and historically. Please be on the lookout for the third video in this series, which will discuss action items that can be taken by white individuals who want to support social justice and the health and well-being of Black lives. Thank you.